Attention, women's health professionals. The next round of FAM is just around the corner. Classes start on October 4th. FAM is the perfect program for busy women's health professionals who want to offer fertility awareness charting support in their practice. FAM cuts out all the fluff and only focuses on what you need to serve your clients better. Each module, homework assignment, in-class training, and chart review session is there for a reason. Where will you be 9 months from now? With a FAM certification, you'll have a brand new skill set that will allow you to use the menstrual cycle as a diagnostic tool and vital sign in your practice. Your confidence in analyzing and interpreting menstrual cycle charts will be at a level you can't even imagine today. And you'll have a brand new offering in your business that will allow you to reach more clients. This knowledge is truly life-changing. Transform your practice in 9 months. You won't regret it. Join us this October in FAM. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/FAMLive to apply today. That's fertilityfriday.com/FAMMLIVE. This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 489. Today I'm sharing a brand new episode in my FAM reality series. I'm sharing an interview with Nadia, who is a member of our most recent Fertility Awareness Mastery live group coaching program. And she shares her experience on hormonal contraceptives, what prompted her to come off contraceptives, her journey transitioning from contraceptives as birth control to using the fertility awareness method for birth control, what that's been like to her. And of course, these episodes provide, in their own words, the real women experience of transitioning to fertility awareness. And I love to do these episodes. I feel that they provide encouragement by showing you that it is possible to do this, and also showing you that plenty of women are making these decisions. It's not uncommon for women to have either a negative experience on contraceptives, or at some point just get to a point in their lives where they're thinking of pregnancy in the future and they're wanting to see what's happening with their hormones. They're wanting to prepare for pregnancy and make sure their bodies are ready when they are ready to make that transition. And so there's lots of different reasons why women are coming off of birth control and switching to non-hormonal methods, such as the fertility awareness method. It can be terrifying. It can be scary at the thought of coming off of birth control, but hopefully these episodes help to show you that it is possible and encourage you if you are thinking about it, doing this yourself and making that switch. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into today's episode with Nadia. And I'm really excited today to be here with Nadia. Nadia was a member of my most recent FAM Live program. And so at the time we're recording, we actually finished our program probably a month and a half ago. So I think this is such a nice time to reconnect and kind of touch base to see how everything was going. So welcome to the show, Nadia.
Thank you, Lisa, for having me. I'm very excited to be here and share, my experience.
Well, yeah, I'm thrilled to have you. And I would love to jump in and by asking one of my favorite questions. I love asking this question because I feel like what other podcasts ask this question. But tell us a little bit about your first period, menarche. Maybe take us through what those early years of cycling were like, if you've had birth control use in there. And then I feel like it kind of leads to why you ended up deciding to switch over to fertility awareness method.
Yeah. Wow. This is definitely a trip down memory lane. So during the beginning of my cycle years, I definitely did not use any sort of contraception, any birth control, anything like that. That didn't come until later, like in my mid-20s. So there was none of that. But yeah, if I remember from the very beginning, I think I was either at the end of elementary school or at the very beginning of middle school. So already that's like a time that's just super difficult, and, just learning to navigate around like school environment and like your peers and everything. And just, with the age, like puberty coming and everything, it was just a very awkward time. But yeah, I remember it pretty clearly. It was an afternoon, and I guess I just started bleeding one afternoon, and I remember telling my mom, I was like, "What is this? Like, is this something to be worried about?" And And then that's when, she went into the whole thing and just explained it all to me. Like, this is something that's going to be coming every month. And then I just remember, being handed a pad. And I was like, oh, like, this is something that I'm going to have to like learn how to use. And it was just all very weird for me. It was just a very weird time to begin with. So to put this on top of that. So yeah, so then pretty much after that, the explanation that I got that first month, now I knew that it was something that I was going to be expecting every month. So I was like, all right. And then from there, it was just pretty much learning how to deal with it. Because I mean, no one before that moment, no one tells you what to expect. Or at least, I mean, we never had that conversation. So I just had no idea what to expect and just took it as it came. But yeah, really as a young person a young woman at that time, learning like your flow, like heavier days, the less heavier days, and I'm sure this is very common for every young woman, but being worried about staining when you're like sitting for long periods. It's like that was always my worry as a young girl. Yeah, there was, and then like learning how to that I guess, well, for me anyway, I was too embarrassed to wear light colored pants on certain days. But yeah, you learn as you get older.
And sorry, can I just ask you, probably mentioned this, but how old were you when you started your periods?
I want to say it was probably, so I remember it was at the possibly the end of fifth grade, maybe sixth grade. So I was probably 10 or 11 years old.
Okay, yeah, because I got the sense that you were kind of young because it's a totally different experience at different ages. Like my son is about to go into sixth grade and he is 10, turning 11 soon. And that even is something that I think about a lot because he's a boy, he's not gonna get a period, right? But like that age, it's incredible for any of you who are listening who have nieces or children of your own or, daughters, friends who are that age, and you look at them and you think, wow. So for some of the women who have shared their experience in these episodes who are at that age, sometimes for them it's very traumatizing because they actually think they're going to die. Because at that age, maybe like in your case, it's totally new. No one's ever said anything to you about it yet.
Mm-hmm. So true.
Yeah. Yeah. I was thinking about that as you were talking about it. So for me, I was 14. So my experience was very different. All my friends had already had their periods, right? And so I was kind of like looking at my watch, like what's happening here? What am I going to get mine? And so when I got it, I was ready and
Wow.
right, like emotionally, like I was like okay, good, like right, like I was like let's go. Whereas at your age, you're like what?
Yeah. Wow. That is such a different experience. Like, wow, to have experienced it that way, that's wow. I can't imagine.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I interrupted you because I wanted to just ask your age because based on how you were describing it, I was like, oh, it sounds like you might have been young.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, you could share as much or as little as you want. I have all these, I'm the questions lady, right? But I was thinking, like, do you have siblings? Like, were you like the eldest? Like, were you chartering this territory by yourself first?
Oh my God. Yes, that's a good question. So I am the oldest. And so I'm the oldest at the time, it was only me and my sister, but there's three of us. But at that time, I was the oldest of both of us. She was 3 years younger than I was. And I was also the oldest of all of our cousins. So I was just the first grandchild really in our group. So I had not heard up until that point what a period was.
I bet your sister's experience was different to yours, right? Because so you had the unfortunate the unfortunate job of being the first to chart this territory. And I would imagine too, from the standpoint of like a parent, again, being someone who has like a 10-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a baby. I do know that like because of my work, but like I had like I've thought of that, I've reflected that, like I've reflected on that where it feels so young. Grade 5 feels way too young.
Yeah.
On the other hand, just to share a little bit like kind of randomness, as a child, when I was growing up, my first friend had her period when we were in fourth grade.
Wow.
And so I also had the experience of like, I remember she said something about pads, and I was like, what, like a piece of paper? And
That's
she's
so
like, no,
funny.
for my period. And I was like, oh, like, right? Like, cause I'm like probably like what, like 8, right? 9 when she was telling me
Wow.
this.
Wow.
And I was like, oh, we're doing that. Okay.
That's so funny.
So yeah, I would have been wholly unprepared for that at that young age, for sure.
Yeah.
But yes, but you were going to continue sharing on your story, but I jumped on that because again, I just know so many listeners, like everyone falls in between, but there's a lot of girls who get their period at that young age, and it feels quite lonely, right? Because you're kind of like the only one. Your friends haven't done it; they're not talking about it if they are.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow.
But so then maybe share like how long did it take you to get used to it? I mean, obviously it's always terrifying when you're in junior high and high school, the thought of like, I remember I'm a little bit like I'm 40 now. And so when I was going through that like teenage phase, I had a subscription for YM. I don't know. Is that still a thing? The magazine? Anyways, anyone who's listening who knows about YM would know that they always had, it's probably the same thing in like Cosmo or whatever, but they always had this thing where people would write in like their most embarrassing stories, but it's always periods. Like it was always like,
Yep.
oh my gosh, like I bled through the oh my god, like it was all like someone's on my pad, like it was always the whole thing for years was just only periods.
Hmm. Yeah, I
I
remember
was
that.
mortified. Yeah. All right. But yeah, share with us how you kind of got through that phase, what your cycles were like, and kind of like, yeah, I'll stop hijacking our conversation.
No, no worries. Well, let's see. I mean, up until this moment right now, I didn't realize that there was other girls who possibly didn't have it at the same time as me. I just always imagined that we all started around the same time. But now, like hearing that you started, like you didn't get yours until you were 14. I mean, I already had, I mean, possibly 4 years among my, like, my other girls, my peers. And so that there is crazy to think about. But yeah, how did I navigate? I mean, it feels like I navigated it alone, really. At the time, I wasn't really reading books like I read books now, where like I read things and watch things and listen to things to learn. There was no such, or to my knowledge, there was no such thing at that time. So I didn't really know how to navigate, really. I just kind of took it as it came along, and just the goal at the end of all of each period was just not to stain myself. As funny as that sounds, and just get through to the next one. And yeah, that was it.
Well, and so based on your story so far, I mean, were your periods fairly like regular, consistent? I always find that when I have clients who can't really remember what their periods were like or are focused on something different, it usually means the period itself wasn't necessarily problematic. It was more, right, the situation. But what was your like, were your periods okay? Were they pretty consistent? Like,
Yeah, that's a good question. They were fairly consistent. Like I expected them to come at a certain time. They came at a certain time. And there was, maybe I just remember a certain period of time where they just felt very heavy. But that may have been my opinion based off of just inexperience. I don't know if they were actually like heavy, but I mean, they probably were, because I was like soaking through like pads. So there was a period of time where flow was heavy, but then it seemed to have regulated. Yeah, but it was there was also periods of time, and this came like later in my years, like probably after like 18, 19 is when I started working out, and pretty heavily at a certain period of time, like from 21 to 24, 25 is when I started working out pretty heavily. And that's when I kind of noticed that I would skip. That's when I first started noticing skipping of periods, and like that was different. So I was like, oh, and it's kind of interesting because I saw that as a good thing, because it was like, oh, great. Like I'm skipping a month. I don't have to deal with it this month. Or yeah, it really wasn't a concern of mine if it didn't show up on time. I was just like, oh, all right, well, I'm getting in a way getting away with it this month, and we'll just see when it shows up. So yeah, that was my experience with it.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I mean, it speaks to the general narrative that we're given about periods, that they're just a hassle and that time of the month and the curse and all of those kinds of things. Yeah, like the whole thing is like it would be better if it was super light, and it'd be even better if it didn't even come, right?
Yeah,
And so hopefully we're shifting the narrative on that a little bit so that we can understand it's a sign of health. But
yeah.
there's all these different challenges for parents and to figure out when is, I mean, for me, it's different because I live and breathe this stuff all the time. I mean, I had a conversation about with my little boys about about periods. And I'm not saying that my parenting approach is the best approach, but I had this conversation with them where it was like, I told them, I was like, okay, so at this age, girls can start menstruating.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, and it can be like it's early, right? Like it can be a challenging time. And I'm like, you can't be the kid that makes fun of the girl if you see something, if you
Oh,
see blood and da da da. So,
wow.
like I said, this was, and like so you would have to be like the good guy. You would have to like you need to be the one that's aware of this. You have to be more mature than all the rest of them. If this ever happens, I want you to be the good guy.
Wow, that's such a great conversation, and like they'll be like the forward thinking ones. It's like,
Well, I don't know if they have a choice, but like, because I mean, like, I could just imagine for the girl who starts having her period at that age, especially if she hasn't had some of those conversations, all that. So,
yeah.
but either way, and especially given like, oh my gosh, like anyone who has boys at that age group, like they're just not the most mature. Like they meet the definition of it, like they're not fully grown yet, right? Like,
Hmm.
so I feel like that's why it's so terrifying for young women of any age in junior high or high school, the thought of having something show through because people
Hmm.
are so immature and like they tease you relentlessly over anything, and that's like the last thing you want to draw attention to yourself and all that. But back to kind of the overarching thing with periods, it's so interesting that you thought of it that way. And did it ever come up? Like, at what point did you realize, oh, wait, that actually was a problem? That, like, when I was working out my periods would kind of be more sporadic because it obviously, from the perspective of everything you learned in the FAM program or the Fertility Awareness Mastery program, everything we would talk about would indicate that that would be a sign that like you were probably not getting enough to eat compared to your exercise. But like, at what point were you aware of that connection?
Ooh, not until I started taking your class.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Wow. Okay.
yeah, yeah.
So that was kind of like one of those moments like, oh, wait, like when that was happening, it actually wasn't good.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And it's so crazy that I didn't learn that until this point.
Wow. It was. And again, it's not surprising. It's so interesting. But was it ever a problem enough that you went to seek support? I mean, did you ever go to a doctor or anything?
No, never.
Not that like I'm saying you should have or anything like that. More just a question. But obviously it wasn't a big enough issue for you to be like, oh my gosh, this is a problem.
No, not at all.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. And so then you mentioned, well, I don't remember if you mentioned this. Yeah, no, you mentioned that you didn't really use contraceptives. So did you use them at any time? Or, yeah, like, have you ever used contraceptives? Like, did you ever use them for a period of time?
Um, I did, and that was, I think, I didn't start using them until what was that, 20 age, the end of tail end of age 25. So might as well say 26. From 26 to what was this year? To 33. So 26, is that what, 7 years?
Yeah, about that. And then was that for contraceptive purposes or,
Yes.
okay.
Hmm.
And so
Yeah.
what was your experience like with contraceptives? Were they fine, no issues? And what made you decide eventually to come off and kind of switch over to fertility awareness method?
Wow. Yeah. So yeah, I started taking birth control for the pills for contraceptive reasons. And looking back now, and even actually I noticed it at the time at the very beginning when I started taking it. And I think I noticed because I had heard about that I would possibly experience these things. So maybe it was bias, maybe not. But the things that I definitely noticed within the first weeks was I felt very emotional. Things that weren't regularly making me emotional were. I actually remember crying during, I think, one of those first weeks over something that wasn't even that serious, which is, I think, something that was noticeable because I really didn't see myself as a person who cried a lot, really. So I thought that was surprising. What else? I mean, that for sure was a big thing that I noticed. I didn't get any acne. I didn't get anything like that. What other symptoms are a part of that?
Well, I mean, if you're racking your brain for symptoms, then did you find overall your experience was pretty positive or pretty kind of neutral? Or did the like emotional thing, like was that a thing that continued, or was that something that you kind of noticed at just at the beginning?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. So the emotional part of things, I think I noticed it the most at the beginning. Yeah, I noticed that at the beginning. And then I kind of, throughout my entire experience, I noticed kind of a form of anxiety a bit. But I think I dealt with that without my knowledge previous to that. So it might have not been the birth control, but I definitely experienced a lot of anxiety. Yeah, I attributed that anxiety to the birth control. I also felt that I was experiencing low libido because that wasn't something that was an issue before, and all of a sudden that's what it felt like. Yeah, those are some of the things that I experienced.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting how everyone's experience is different and at different stages. So some women experience certain things similar to your emotional responses right away. And sometimes it's so kind of egregious that it causes, either to switch to something different or to come off altogether. But then other women don't notice anything up front. And then years in, they might start to have panic attacks and anxiety and stuff like that. And then it's so much harder to pinpoint that it's the pill, because why in your mind it doesn't make sense, like why all of a sudden would I have anxiety if I've been taking this thing for so long. But then when you understand the role of the nutrient depletion, like over time and etc., and that is part of the explanation, right? But you wouldn't know that because no one tells you
Right.
when you go on these things. So then you decided to come off a little while ago. And so what prompted you to make that switch, especially given that you weren't necessarily having, like you were, it sounds like you were having some symptoms. I don't know if they were significant enough to be the reason, but yeah, when did you kind of decide to switch, make the jump?
Wow. So I was actually on the fence about this decision, or it was definitely before this year. It's funny because I didn't actually make any moves and decided to take your class until this year, but really, actually, the thought came to mind possibly 2 years ago. And the reason for that was more of just I wanted to take a natural route. I didn't want, like, I really don't like to take any sort of medicines unless it's, something just really hurts. And the birth control was really the only outlier in my life. So I was like, oh, I need to practice what I preach, or I would like to anyway. And I don't want to take this. I don't need this. Like, why am I making my body do something against its natural being? So that was my first thought, is like, I don't want to take this anymore. So then at that point is when I kind of started. I think I was very heavily into podcasts at the time. So I started looking up topics on birth control. And I think it's very possible your podcast was the very first one that I probably bumped into. And I remember that there was an episode, and I was hearing about how there was a natural way to do birth control rather than taking contraceptives. So that's kind of how, when the seed was planted in my head, I was like, oh, there's an option. And then from there, I just never really took action just because I was fearful. I don't think I had enough information at the time to make the decision. And therefore, I never looked further into it, and I just stopped altogether. I was like, oh, well, there was that part, the kind of, I didn't have enough information. And then there was just the fear of it. It's like, oh, well, even if this is an option, I'm kind of too afraid to stop taking this. Like, I don't want to get pregnant. And, that to this point is still my goal. So there was that fear too.
Mm-hmm. Well, do you want to talk about that a little? I feel like that's a huge piece of it, the fear of coming off contraceptives. And that, I mean, that's been a pretty consistent topic over the years on the podcast. And I often share that I do see a difference between myself and with my my clients in their 20s and even early 30s, because I feel like I think the pharmaceutical industry has just gotten like a bigger foothold or something. And this is a huge moneymaker for them. I mean, it's like a $30 billion industry or something. 100 million women worldwide are on the pill. And these companies put out contraceptives, they put out hormone replacement therapy for women in menopause, right? Like they have all the, like they are trying to capture you from menarche to menopause. They're trying to put you on something from menarche to menopause and then capitalize on you again from menopause all the way up. Now, this is a commentary kind of separate from like, yes, I know women need to have this option. And like, obviously I advocate for like choice and all that. So just to clarify, I always have to clarify, because that was something coming out of the woodwork. Like, yeah, I'm just trying to take away birth control pill. No, I'm not. I'm not trying to take away birth control pills. I'm trying to educate you on what the birth control pills really do. So that, because the issue is that a lot of women do have symptoms, but they have no idea that it's related. And another issue, like you said, Nadia, was that you didn't know that there even was another option. And that is the problem. The problem is that women don't always know that there's something else out there. And what's interesting is that what the research shows is that about 50% of women stop using the pill that they're using within a year. And so whether they're switching to another pill or coming off, and that means that like at least half of the women are so dissatisfied that they're coming off. Like, so like there is a real issue with women and not necessarily being satisfied with the pills. So then talk to us about the fear. Like, where does that in your life, where did that come from, right? Like, how did it manifest? And even how did this result in a conversation with your partner? And like, how did that go?
Yeah. So the fear for me came from always being worried about the possibility of getting pregnant. Like, I knew that I was not ready for it. I was definitely not in a place in my life for it to be an option. So that was a fear of mine. And I think that fear has kind of been there since I was much younger, because, that's something my parents also always mentioned again and again. It's like, oh, you better watch out, you're too young. And they kind of always like joked about, it's like, oh, we better not find out about, something like this, that you're going to end up pregnant one day. So that was something that was definitely always mentioned. So I think that like that's a place where it came from, but also just me knowing it's like, oh, well, like I'm not ready for it. I'm afraid of it. I like birth and all of that is still to this day something that actually still kind of scares me. So the whole topic just really has always scared me. And it's, I guess, from not knowing enough, but that's where the fear comes from, of coming off the birth control once, I needed some sort of contraception. And the shame of that is that as you mentioned, you don't really know your options. And that's, I don't know, that just makes me really sad, because it's, how is there advertisement? And, you watch those commercials about, oh, take this pill, take this shot, take this patch, whatever it is. And you all of a sudden have this option to be free of, as they advertise, acne, the possibility of getting pregnant, heavy periods. Like, they list all of these great things about why you should take it, but I wish there would be more education on other options. Like, this isn't the only option. Like, why is our only option like a synthetic like drug, like a hormone that isn't even produced in our body? That's just so crazy to me. Like, and man, I could get on a soapbox about this topic. Like, it just makes me so upset that there isn't more information. Like, why isn't this being taught from an early age? Like, we have sex education classes. We start learning about our periods in that class. And like, why isn't this method or this topic talked about from that age or in those classes? And why is a 28-year-old in my case, or 30-year-old in my case, just learning about this option now? And I had to do the deep research. Like, I had to look into it. This is the only way I learned about it. And yeah, a lot of the times that's the only way you'll learn about it, unless it's word of mouth. Like, I've started talking about it to like my sisters, my mom. Like, I've let them know that, hey, like, I'm doing this, and I'm sure I don't know. I definitely know my younger sisters haven't heard about the option. I'm not sure if my mom has. We haven't had that discussion, but yeah, I mean, at least, now they know that it's an option, but it just, yeah, it makes me sad that there's not more education on it.
As a women's health professional, you already know the value of tracking the menstrual cycle, but I'm guessing that you're not comfortable interpreting complex charts, weird mucus patterns, abnormal bleeding, or other similar situations. You're passionate about fertility awareness and want to use it in your practice, but you're just not sure where to start. That's where FAM comes in. The next class of FAM is just around the corner. Registration is now open for the Fertility Awareness Mastery Mentorship Program. Classes start on October 4th. By the time you finish your FAM certification, you'll have the skills to confidently teach fertility awareness to your clients, interpret all kinds of complex charting scenarios, and you'll have the step-by-step protocols you need to help your clients improve their hormone and menstrual cycle health. Apply today at fertilityfriday.com/FAMlive. And when you apply, we'll send you the details to join one of our upcoming information sessions. Transform your practice in 9 months. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/FAMlive. That's fertilityfriday.com/FAMMLIVE. Now let's go ahead and jump back into today's episode. Well, I mean, I've had a couple of years to reflect on like why this might not be the case. And I think one of the things that's interesting is that when you see these products and these advertisements, you could just, I think that what happens is we don't really contemplate their motive for creating these products. And so I think it's really helpful to remember that these CEOs of like pharmaceutical companies, I don't think that they're like, I could be wrong. Okay. Disclaimer. I don't think that they're sitting around thinking, how can I make all these women's lives better? How can I make all these women healthier?
Right.
I don't think that's what they're thinking. Like, if you go back to the story of how the pill came about, there's a lot of interesting pieces of information there. I mean, they were trying to solve a problem. I'll have to include it's right there. I think it's called The Fertility Doctor, because I'm looking at my bookshelf. But there's a book that I got that went through this, and it was a really interesting read. And I referenced it in the Fifth Vital Sign when I shared the story of how the pill came about. And I mean, these doctors did have like good intentions in the sense that before the pill, it was a hysterectomy. Like that's how they were solving like the problem of women like birth control. So like obviously the pill is a step up from hysterectomy. But it was interesting how they just discovered it. I've talked about it on the podcast in many interviews. So, many of the listeners may have heard this already, but ultimately they did this as a way to try to prevent pregnancy. They had like a trial before they officially came out with it. And they gave the women the pill, and they gave it to them every single day. So there was no breaks. And then the women started thinking they were pregnant because back then there was no pill. So if you weren't getting your period, it was because you were pregnant. And they couldn't really, like, even though they tried to tell them, like, no, it's the drugs, like, it just wasn't sinking in. So that's how they determined to do it, where you would have the sugar pill week and stuff like that, because they would literally were trying to sell it like, no, it's like the same thing as when you have your period. So like even at the very beginning, they were never really telling you exactly what it was doing. They were kind of making it look similar to a woman's natural cycle. And so as a result, I mean, again, we have to think about their motives. Like, so nowadays when they're coming out with the pill in different outfits, like I would call the patch and the ring a pill in a different outfit. because it's the same drug. It's just applied in a different way, right?
Mhm.
Even the IUD, it's like a pill in a different outfit. Like I understand that it's like a different method and they make it feel like we have all these choices, but it's like the same thing, just applied in different ways. What is the motivation for them doing that? Again, it's not for them to make our lives better. Arguably, after is it 60 years? The pill came out in 1960, so that's like 70 years. Like arguably, like if you take time to read, there's so much pill research, obviously 250 citations in like chapter 7 of the FFP, like there's a lot, right? So like if you like read pill research, there's consistent issues with it this whole time, right? But again, their motivation isn't necessarily to make the drug better. Often the studies clearly tell you that their motivation is to try to change the way the doctors change their messaging around the side effects to try to get women to go on it and stay on it, even though it has side effects.
That's very true. And often I have to remind myself about the motives behind, why something is, and rather than just thinking of my own, but that's so true.
Well, and even to go like, because it's like, okay, well, why don't they talk about it in classrooms? Like, okay, why do you think they have the talk with everybody in 5th grade? Like, is it for our health and our benefit, or is it for hygienic reasons? Because the teachers are not health professionals, so the teachers are not equipped or even able to deal with the girls bleeding all over the class. Like, I actually think that they do it for practical reasons.
Wow.
Not because they care about us. I could be wrong. Like they also care about us, but like think about this from like a school hygiene standpoint. I like when as a child, like as a mother with children who like back when my boys were in kindergarten and stuff, like if they wet themselves, like they weren't permitted to change them, so they would like call us, and like we would have to go pick them up. So I'm like literally thinking like, okay, if we actually look at like what is the motivation, like as a woman, now, in your 30s, like me in like my, like just finished my 30s, but it's like, we think of this as like, oh, this is life changing. They should tell us this is for our health. This is for our benefit. We should know this. This is give me a better quality of life if I understand how my cycle works. Like, I don't think that that's their motivation. And I think that once we realize that, then we can, in my opinion, I have created this podcast and the resources, the book and my programs, because I'm not waiting for the school system to figure out that this is important or for the pharmaceutical companies to like come up with a better drug. Like this is not, that's not their motivation. I think the motivation and the shift in the conversation culturally is going to come from women like you and me who are like, no, we need something better than this. And like, then we do the thing that's better.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
Maybe I'm cynical, but that's honestly, that's what I think about it.
No, that's so true. And I would think the same thing is like, it's, I don't know. I feel like with these types of systems, and I mean, I don't want to like sound like I'm against systems and like, all of that, but like, I don't know. I think there's definitely, it's self-serving, or it's just so that, I don't know how to put it, but exactly as
It
you.
doesn't serve, like, it's again, they're motivated for different reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, it's not a little bit of money that the birth control pill brings in, like and other things under the umbrella of hormonal contraceptives. So I think I just don't think the solution is going to come from those high level corporate institutions. I just don't think that the actual solution that's going to be the most beneficial for women from the health standpoint, all that. I just don't necessarily think it's going to come from there. I mean, change comes from the bottom up. So if we want that kind of change in our communities, in our schools, like it would be going to board meetings and advocating for it, or coming up with some sort of program and then pitching it to the school boards and seeing if you could get into the school. Like that's like, this is how this stuff actually happens. Like if something's going to get into the schools, someone has to develop a program that ends up going into the schools. So I'm a big advocate for like, okay, well, let's see what we can do about it. Cause I mean, I'm not waiting for like whatever company that comes up with all these medications to come up with, because it's been 70 years. Okay. And they're still like literally like putting the same stuff in different outfits. Like, so
Yeah.
I think we're just gonna have to keep waiting on that one. But yes, I think it's wonderful that for however you were able to find this information out, that you were able to discover it. And I think what's ironic about it is that even though it's still kind of difficult to stumble on this information, so as for you, all the listeners of this podcast, especially for those of you who've been listening for a long time, I mean, now this information feels like just like, of course, right? It just feels like second nature. Or for those of you who've just discovered it, you might be in the same boat as Nadia, like, what? But ironically, the average woman still has no idea. Like, we're still there. So I really do believe that, to get this information out, it's women like you, it's women like me. We talk to our friends, we share the information, share the book, share the podcast, share whatever you want to share, taking charge of your fertility, have interesting conversations. That is how we will eventually get to a tipping point. And what's crazy is that today, 20 something years since I first discovered fertility awareness, this is like, for me to reflect, it's incredible. Like, periods are everywhere now, but the average woman still doesn't know.
Wow.
Like, we've made progress. Like, there's so much more awareness than there ever was, but still, we're still not there.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Well, I'm hoping to see a day where that changes and there is more education and there are options out there, like readily and easily more accessible.
I think there will be. Okay, I feel like we went on a tangent, which was interesting, but I want to get back to yours. So we were talking about the fear, right? And then I like this whole tangent and like meandered around, but going back to the fear. So I don't know if you would say you fully conquered the fear, but maybe share your experience, on the program and like learning the method now. It's been a couple months since the program ended. You've, charted, you have a couple cycles under your belt now. Like, share for the listeners who are in that same boat, who are thinking, okay, this sounds interesting, but man, I don't want to get pregnant. Like, am I going to get pregnant like as soon as I get off the pill? Are you overcoming the fear? Have you overcame it? Is this a process? Like, what's going on?
Wow. I would say it's definitely a process. I mean, that fear is still there, but now I feel that it's going away a little bit, time, like month after month, cycle after cycle, just because it's like, oh, science is working. Like, there's science behind it. There's proof. It's not just like, I don't know, like a concept. There's like proof behind it. So like, that's what's making me less fearful. I mean, really, at this point for me, it's been 6 cycles now since coming off of the pill. And now, looking back, I wish that I would have just done it 2 years ago when the thought first came into my head. Again, I didn't have all the information I needed, and I guess I didn't want it bad enough, because anything that you want bad enough, you'll find a way to make it happen, learn more about it. So there's that part. But yeah, I mean, with the information that I know now and deciding to have, let me rewind. So before I decided to take your class, I got your book on Audible. I was like, okay, well, let me start with the book. Let me get more information. Like, when I finally decided that, I was like, okay, this has to happen. And it's funny because it was either something that I had heard on a podcast. I don't know which one, but I remember hearing something about once you get past the 5-year mark of taking it or something, like it has some sort of negative benefits or something about that. It's harder to, I don't know, recover. I forgot exactly what the fact was, but when I heard that, I was like, oh, I'm coming up on 5. I'm still under 5. Like, there's still time for me. There's still an opportunity to make this better. So I remember that was a thought. And so coming up, I think I actually even passed the 5 years. And then that's when I was like, okay, no, I have to do something about this. So I was coming up on the end of my prescription and I was like, okay, I'm not renewing. I keep renewing and I say, this is going to be the last time. But I was like, nope. I just decided not to make my appointment with my doctor, and then therefore I couldn't renew my prescription. So at that point I had decided, I was like, okay, I'm just going to stop taking this. And with the information that I've learned so far, like with your book, The Fifth Vital Sign, listening to podcasts, and also reading the book, that very big book. I I can't think of the title right now, but
Oh, Tony Weschler's book, Taking
yes,
Charge of Your Fertility. Yeah.
yes. I started reading that book. I actually started that book once I stopped taking the pill. I was like, okay, well, I've listened to Lisa's book on Audible. I'm reading this book now. I'm getting the information I need. With this information that I have now, just start doing it. Like, you're not going to be perfect. Don't wait for perfection. Just start doing it with the information you have. And at that point, I think I had a foundation, or I had basics on what I should be doing. I knew that I, could be taking my temperature. And I mean, wow, I feel kind of scattered right now because like there's so many thoughts that come to mind during that period of time. But yeah, I definitely had my basics at the time. And when I finally decided to just go for it and start charting, I was kind of even hesitant to start charting. I was like, oh, well, because if I start charting, like, what if this is wrong? But I mean, I don't know. You just kind of have to start somewhere. And yeah, I'm glad I did. And I actually even forgot what what the question was at this point with the tangent that I went on.
Well, I mean, I feel like you answered it in terms of like, were you able to how did you cope with the fear and like coming off of it and as you were doing it? And one thing I'll mention is that, I mean, you're not alone in this. And, we've already alluded to it in the episode that I feel like these days, the younger women especially are even more fearful. I grew up I always say this, in the 90s. And in the 90s, they were always talking about HIV. And so that was like a thing. And so they were always talking about condoms. And so I left the 90s completely confident that condoms worked. I knew that the efficacy was 98%. And I was comfortable with that. And so that could have just been me or where I lived or whatever. I'm not saying everyone who grew up in the 90s had the same idea, but what I can tell you is that my experience was that I was not dissuaded from using a non-hormonal method in that respect. So when I made the decision to come off of the pill, because I did the opposite thing of what most people do. I was on the pill for period pain. And then when I needed it for contraceptive purposes, I actually came off the pill and used condoms instead. So I did the opposite thing as most people did. But I felt confident in that decision. I had my concerns about being on birth control, obviously, or I wouldn't be here. But I also I didn't feel any kind of way about relying on condoms. And I remember justifying in my head thinking, well, I would, because this was my logic at the time. I was like, well, I couldn't trust the pill, like only like in my head, like maybe I'm just a weirdo. So I was always going to use condoms regardless. And so I was like, well, if I'm going to use them anyways, I may as well like ditch the pill part. And I feel like the younger women today, I feel like even some of the information about condoms is very disparaging and makes people feel like condoms by themselves are not a legitimate option. I've seen websites that talk about effectiveness and seem very discouraging about condoms, almost like you're risking it if you choose to use them. And I think that is a very different message than when I was growing up.
Yeah, that's so true. Wow. I mean, I don't hear about, I mean, I'm not in that age group anymore, so it's yeah, I don't know. I think you're right. I think my experience also, like, hearing about condoms is like, oh, this is your method. Like this, like it's a safe method. You use it. It's this percent amount of like effectiveness. Yeah, that's kind of crazy to hear that they're saying different things today.
Well, and again, I believe that it's because they want the women to be on the pill. So I believe that, again, that I believe that and I think it's true, they do. So I think that there's a reason why. I mean, there's 100 different avenues toward the pill. How many friends of yours, or for the listeners, friends or family members or whatever acquaintances, that went on the pill for acne, went on the pill for period pain, went on the pill for regulating the cycle, went on the pill for PMS, went on the pill for, right? Like, name it, they went on the pill. Went on the pill because they were going on a vacation and they didn't want to get the period. Like, what there's all these avenues where these days a lot of women are on the pill, not even for contraceptive purposes initially, and maybe they eventually use it for contraceptive purposes, but there's a lot of, like, they just want to get the women on the pill, and the pill is the thing that all the women are supposed to be on. And if you have a doctor and you're a young lady in that kind of reproductive age group and you're not on the pill and you're sexually active, they're kind of like, well, wait a minute, we're missing a piece of this. Like, it's like every one of you is supposed to be on the pill, like we're missing that part, so let's get you on the, like, right? Yeah, I feel like there's different motivations there. And again, the little hole that we fill with these types of conversations is, well, being on the pill isn't just synonymous with the concept of contraception. There are other ways to manage your fertility. The pill and other hormonal contraceptives are not for everybody. Plenty of women have good experiences with these methods, but plenty of women do not. And I've had so many classes to date, even in our class, if you think back to our first session together, in the first session is when I give everyone the opportunity to share a little bit about themselves and if they had pill use and what they're hoping to get out of the program. And sometimes those sessions bring me almost to tears because of things that women say in the session and how difficult it was for them, how many different methods of hormonal birth control they switched from this one to this one to this one to this one, and they never thought that they had any other alternatives. And I've heard just the desperation. I mean, this is not everyone's experience, but there's a percentage of women who feel this way. They feel trapped because they might have anxiety or panic attacks or whatever negative side effect on these things. And they try so hard. They go from this one to that one to the other one to everything in the middle. And they're still not necessarily feeling good physically or emotionally or whatever it is. And they don't have any options. So I'm definitely this is why I keep releasing these episodes, because it's like, no, there's other alternatives, and it's not for everybody. There's no method that I think everyone should use. I think that, though, it's good to know, because like for you, in your case, you had your reasons why you wanted to come off, and, turns out that you were able to learn the method and you were willing to take the time, and all those myths, like it's too hard. Like, was it?
Right.
Like, it's too complicated. Like, is it? Like, no, it's not. For people who are motivated to do it, it's actually not too complicated. It's not too hard. And when we use it correctly, it's up to 99.4% effective. I do, of course, recommend taking a class to learn, obviously, because I myself learned better from instructors as well. And I believe in speeding up that time between learning to expert, right? So for women who are serious, right, who this is serious for me, I really don't want to get pregnant right now. Like, I don't want to be on hormones, but like, I still need the same efficacy. I'm willing to learn. I'm willing to do like the chart and all that kind of stuff. Like, yeah, take a class, speed it up. So you don't have to take like 6 to 8 months, 6 to 10 months or whatever to feel confident. Like, you can speed up that process by taking a good solid class.
Oh yeah, I 100% agree with that. And like one of my reasons for taking the class, well, one of them, yeah, exactly, is that I just wanted that confidence that it was like, okay, well, like I can do the reading on my own, but like I'm being taught by someone who's been doing it for so long, and I just want that confidence at the end of this class to know that I'm doing it right.
Well, and so to put you on, how do you feel? Like, no, just kidding. But like, so maybe just share for someone who's thinking about it, like as we're starting to wrap up our conversation today, I feel like this is a good time to ask that question. But for someone who is listening right now and they're kind of in that same boat that you were, like, so even think back to yourself when you started listening, what would you want them to know about your experience? How did you feel before the class, and like, how do you feel now? The class has been over for about a month and a half.
Wow. Well, I was very excited to take the class. I dove right into the videos. I prepared a little bit before we started meeting for our classes. Attend all the classes if you can, because it's very nice to be able to be there live for the sessions. Of course, the sessions are recorded, but it's just very nice to be a part of the classes when they're live, because you're able to ask your questions and just, I guess, be a part of the discussion, really, and just kind of ask the questions as they come up if you have any. And I wish that I just went for it 2 years ago, back then when the thought first came to mind, because at the end of it all, I just learned that there's nothing to be afraid about. It's just a matter of doing it. Everything new is scary. Everything new is scary. And it's just a matter of just getting the reps in, starting to do the work, starting to learn it, and just not being afraid of not being perfect. Nothing's going to be perfect. And even once you, I don't know, it just takes practice. And if my present self was talking to my past self, I would say, just do it. Don't be afraid. At the end of it all, you're gonna have a method that works for you, and you're able to take the natural route that you wanted to take, and you have a method and a tool that you'll be able to use for the rest of your life, or as long as you have your cycles, that you're able to avoid pregnancy naturally. But also on the other side of that, and I know we didn't talk about a lot about this because it wasn't my goal, but also the method is helpful in if you're trying to conceive. So, whatever method or whatever, whatever your goal is, you have both those options. But I would say definitely to anyone who's considering, who's kind of hesitant about it, just, learn more about it. And there's definitely science behind it. It's not like a woo-woo thing, which was something that a thought of mine that, when I first learned about it, it was like, oh, where's the science? Because I'm like a very, it's just like, where are the facts kind of thing. So yeah, I would say just inform yourself, get Lisa's book. That's a great starting place, or even listen to podcast episodes and just inform yourself and just start learning about it if it's something you're interested in. You have nothing to lose.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for sharing that. I feel like it's a nice full circle moment to hear you say, like, there's nothing to be afraid of. Like, once you learn, it's okay. Because I mean, that's ultimately one of the messages. Like, it's not to say the fear isn't justified. Of course it is. You could look at fear differently. I know sometimes people talk about like that. If you pay attention to that emotion, the emotion that you feel, like I feel often in like the pit of my stomach, like kind of thing, like that kind of butterfly feeling. And that's often a similar physical feeling as excitement. And so sometimes, especially if you're doing things like talking in front of people, doing presentations or something important. So sometimes I look at that feeling, the physical feeling, and think to myself, okay, well, that's my, whatever it is, my body, my emotions, or my internal guidance system telling me that this isn't important, right? So you can reframe the fear is what I'm saying. But it's nice to hear you say that, because I mean, it's a very interesting and transformative thing, this charting. It's very, very interesting. And what doesn't come out before you do it, is that when you start to chart, it's not this cycle that happens once, right? This is a consistent kind of pattern that you start to track. It's not always the same, like we talk about that a ton in the class, but it's hard to be scared of something like 2 years in, like assuming that you're cycling fairly consistently, like not always exactly the same, but like assuming that you're cycling, right? You continue to see the same signs.
Yeah.
Cycle after cycle after cycle. So once you get past that initial fear of it and you start to chart cycle 1, like you said, now you've charted 6 cycles, like imagine how you'll feel in a year. So I've been around a long time, and I've had clients who've since gone on to be educators, and I've charted for years and years after, and I've been charting for like 20 something years. Like there's at this point, there's no fear, because it's like, we've seen, like, it's like reruns. Like we've seen this episode before, sometimes there's a twist, right? A little plot twist and whatever, but it's like essentially the same show that we're seeing over and over. So you can learn to kind of manage that. And it's a whole lot less scarier than you think, but you have to first I think once you get past like cycle 3, like it's just it's again, reruns, like with a couple plot twists here and there,
Yeah, that's so true. And I remember before we even started the class, or even before I started my very first chart, my thought was, wow, like how on earth am I ever going to be that comfortable? And then when you said after 3 months, you'll start feeling a little bit more comfortable. But until then, like you'll still be kind of, you'll still be kind of hesitant a little bit. And
well, because it's like driving. Like imagine if you read a book on driving and then you got in a car. Like I feel like the driving analogy really works. Like you're not going anywhere. Like you have to actually drive before you can, then like a couple of times, right?
Yeah.
Like for anyone who drives, it's such a good analogy because it's the same thing. And charting is not something, it's an action. So it's like trying to cook in a book, like learning how to chef it up. Like, no, you have to actually like get the flour and stuff, like, and, make the thing. And then it doesn't turn out how you want. You have to make it again. So it's a similar kind of thing. And it's one of those things. And maybe that's why I'm always like, don't wait for the education system, just do it. Like, because this charting thing is very much a do it thing. It's very much like you have to, it's like when people say you have to be there. It's like, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
You had to do the thing, because only when you do the thing, you're like, oh, okay, okay, all right. And like in cycle, that's why I'm like the cheerleader, in cycle 1, I'm like, okay, I know it's a little tricky right now. I'm throwing all this stuff at you, right? Just hang in there. Cause when you get to cycle, like, right, like I'm like doing all that.
Yeah.
And at first you're like, no way.
Right.
He's crazy. This is not. But then you get to cycle 3 or cycle 4, cycle 6, and you're like, okay, you were correct. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm.
Thanks for being my cheerleader. So it's a nice full circle moment for me, because that's, of course, my goal, just to kind of emancipate you from the fear of the pill, or the fear of not having the pill, or something like that. It sounded better in my head. But as we wrap up, I just want to thank you so much, Nadia, for being on the show today. I mean, did you have any last words for the listeners before we go?
Take the class. Take it. If you're considering it, if you're just take it. You'll be so happy you did. You'll have the information, you'll have the tool, you'll have the method for the rest of your life. You'll be able to share it with your friends and family, and just do it.
Oh, thank you so much. It has been my pleasure chatting with you today. So thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Lisa.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please share it with a friend. You'll find the show notes page for today's episode over at fertilityfriday.com/489. I hope that you enjoyed today's episode with Nadia. It was such a treat having her on the show and hearing her experience. I always say to my clients afterwards that even though we've gone through the program together, we've spent a lot of time together, we've had a lot of conversations about their intake, we do a detailed intake form, so I know a lot about their health history and everything. I always feel that I deepen into that information when they're able to share their story in their own words. So there's always just a bit more nuance to it. And I just love sharing these episodes. I think it's such a great way to really hear how this really works. So instead of hearing someone say, oh, fertility awareness doesn't work, or, oh, it's like the rhythm method, or, oh, it's too complicated for women to learn. When you listen to these episodes, you can, let them describe it in their own words. And so far, I haven't yet had a client tell me that it's too complicated for them to learn. It just takes a little bit of time for a few cycles, and then you are kind of good to go. So with that said, I hope you have a wonderful weekend whenever you're tuning into the show. And of course, as always, until next time, be well and happy charting. And that's a wrap. If you're loving the FAM Practitioner series, then I know you'll love our Fertility Awareness Mastery Mentorship Program. It's a 9-month immersive experience that will completely transform the way you work with clients, allowing you to not only teach fertility awareness to your clients, but to use the menstrual cycle as a vital sign and diagnostic tool in your women's health practice. Our next class starts on October 4th, so there's still time to reserve your spot. Apply now at fertilityfriday.com/famlive, and when you apply, you'll have the opportunity to join one of our upcoming information sessions for additional details. There are no other programs like this offered anywhere. Transform your practice in 9 months. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/famlive to apply now. That's fertilityfriday.com/FAMMLIVE.